So go on, Paul, tell us about how it started all at the beginning. How did it all come together?
Well, I can only say from what I remember, but I guess when I was in some of my other roles as a freelancer, I was at this, it used to be like a partnership meeting of different organisations, and when Paul Kelly came to work in Lancashire, he'd come to this meeting and he had some money left over and he was desperate to be able to just give that to some artist to do some stuff. And actually in that meeting he'd put together this proposal that was called In Situ, because we didn't come up with that name, you know, that was on this kind of proposal, to give a bit of money to some artists to do something. And I think I was in that meeting clocking what that could be. Claire Timon was also in the meeting, which obviously we all know Claire really well. And after the meeting, me, Claire and Paul, I think we were walking back and we were talking about what could be possible. And that's when I think the conversation was had about, because we all sort of know each other in various different ways through Uncoat Project, and obviously I've worked a lot with you, this idea about whether something could develop with us three, or particularly working with you two as artists. I think that was the thing, the initial thing, that's where the first conversations of what something might be started there. And the first opportunity was Paul knew about this conference that Jana was doing in Amsterdam and said, we can pay for you to go.
And sometimes I think we are manufactured like a boy band, because they actually were the matchmakers that brought us together. So Paul and Claire had worked with all three of us. It was Claire that had the money that enabled us to go to Amsterdam.
I knew he'd got it from somewhere.
Yeah, it was Claire, and Claire had an underspend. Mm-hmm. She had an underspend for us to do something and go somewhere, in the hope that it might gel something. Yeah. And Paul Kelly, because of the work through the Liverpool Biennial and Homebake, knew Jana, and she was organising this big conference in Amsterdam. So you and I said, well, let's go to Amsterdam. At least my memory is that you and I, but we didn't know, I didn't know any of the speakers, and so we were just reading through what was possible to go to, and the one that stuck out was the one with Rick Lowe, and so we went to Amsterdam.
I seem to remember having some chats in your kitchen.
Chats, and I think it was like, well, where are we going to go?
Yeah,
what should we do?
Yeah. And then Paul, I just remember Paul suggesting, there's something going on. Yeah, Paul Kelly, there's something going on in Amsterdam. And then, key moment.
Key moment, yeah.
Rick Lowe was there.
Rick Lowe was there, and that's what we went to see. And I also remember clearly that you didn't get any money because you weren't an artist.
Because I wasn't an artist.
And the money was only available to artists.
I can't remember that.
Can you not?
Wow.
Poor old Paul had to pay for it himself. And I can also remember that we were going as like almost three strangers, as in like we didn't know each other.
Paul had to share a bed.
Did you? Did you two share
a bed?
I mean,
no.
In a room without a window.
But I didn't have a window either.
I've known William for a long time though. It wouldn't, and obviously I've worked for you, but I did know William. But I guess, the intensity of being together on a trip, like thinking, well, what is this thing that will become In Situ? And I think the thing for me, there was this, and it's always been that thing of like the idea of what collaborative practice is that artists are one piece of the puzzle, but my whole career had been working in between that space and working with artists on it. I do remember that conversation in the bar about what it is, and that idea of working, for me anyway, working sort of where I live, but also like trying to talk about this idea that something could last over a long period of time and not have...
Yeah, but that was Rick, wasn't it? That blew us away. Well,
maybe that was away. After. Yeah.
Going to that and like looking at, listening to this guy talking about working in one place as an artist, with a group of other artists, and what they managed to achieve in Project Row houses with nothing, and sustain that and make these massive changes.
It kind of made it real in a way, didn't it? The potential. It kind of made it can be done.
Yeah, sort of opened my eyes to what was possible. Because I mean, one of my memories, like I was frustrated at that point in my career. Yeah. And I was frustrated because I was always an artist parachuted into other people's neighbourhoods.
Yeah, I think I remember a conversation with you, Kerry, about just having something in place that would enable us to do projects that we really wanted to do, rather than someone else's commission type thing.
That was a really key thing about it, wasn't it? It's about having that really openness and space and time to do that in a place without
creating that autonomy.
And I think from my point of view, I think what I was looking for was, because I'd done lots of work, I guess, within arts development, and felt like I was part of a system that would have created those briefs that you then just have an artist come in for, and then the money only lasted for so long. That was a kind of a realisation that both my experience of working with both of you in various different ways was to do with that kind of practice that didn't look like other art projects, that it was someone spending time, like, I always remember, like for you, it was that thing of like exploring in a community, like what's growing there, or that unsafe route to school video we did with the young people, and then you just, exploring all that stuff in Colne from where you were from. And I think for me, my background had always worked with artists which had that workshop model, that participatory thing, and this was something else going on, and I was really keen to see what that could be, and what are the things to put in place that enable to do that from my experience of working in various different roles, like a community development worker or arts development. You forget how it felt, well, it feels really radical, didn't it, to kind of put that stuff out, not just for what we were doing internally and you two were doing, but putting those out for other people. It's like, it felt like it was something, something else going on.
Yeah, kind of passing a bit of authority back to the artist, I suppose, in terms of what they were going to do.
Yeah. Which is why I guess terminology like artist-led was important in those early days, because it was flipping it all on its head, so that an artist could just come and listen and respond and find a way into, like you say, is being useful and valuable in that place.
Yeah.
I want to kind of go back to Claire as well, because Claire was very much involved in Housing Market Renewal Programme and getting artists involved in that. And I think that's how you and I came across one another, is through some projects that Claire was doing. And that's because I was just thinking then, why Briarfield? Of all the places it could have been, why was it Briarfield? But for me, it was Briarfield because I'd done a very short thing in Briarfield looking at interim spaces of brownfield sites. So where they'd taken the houses, knocked the houses down as part of the housing renewal programme, and what was going to happen to those spaces. And I think I was only there for like 2 weeks or something like that. So but I met quite a few people in those 2 weeks in Briarfield people, who told me some quite harrowing and tragic stories of how they were compulsory purchased and moved out of their homes, how the community was, destroyed, and people sent to various places in their new houses. But that's why I was in Briarfield, and you were in Briarfield as well as connecting to the housing market renewal. I mean, I spoke to people, because I went to quite a few housing market renewal areas, so Liverpool being another one, and Anfield where the bakery is, and then a site in Blackburn. So I worked with Claire on a project that was over a period of time, going to different places.
I think artists back then at that time were being used to tick a box called community consultation, whereas really they weren't really listening to anything they got back from the consultation anyway. It was just kind of like...
Yeah, they didn't want to hear what the artist was saying.
Yeah, and then they didn't really respond creatively or constructively in any way. They just kind of ticked the box. Yes, we've had a chat with the community, they know what's coming, and this is what we're going to do. Some of the things that appealed to me back then was bypassing those things, what were going on, so that we could have this autonomy and make sure that there were meaningful engagements and meaningful relationships or meaningful art things that we made. They were all kind of like genuinely, I know that they called it grassroots, don't they? But it's a bit like that, isn't it? They came from the place and the people rather than from up here. So that was one of the appealing things for me early on. I was never sure what in situ were going to be, I must admit. I suppose it's kind of an envisioning moment what we had, weren't it? We were kind of sitting down at your kitchen table. I can see it now.
If we go back to that visit to Amsterdam and meeting Rick, and if you remember...
I do remember.
What I said is that which is a networking tool. It's like you should, well, somebody I used to work with all the time always said this: you should find 3 people you don't know and speak to them. And you just went straight to Rick.
I went straight to Rick.
Had he just finished his talk or something? And
yeah, but so blown away by Project Row Houses in Houston, Texas. And I remember saying to him, I'm with my mates, William and Paul, and we're about to set up an arts organisation. We're going to be embedded and we'd love to come and see you in Houston. And he was like, yeah, come over.
Yeah, we'll put you up.
We'll put you up.
Yeah.
And that was that. Because that was like a real kind of game changer.
Oh, a significant moment, I think. Yeah, definitely.
But again, I think even the thought that we could just go and visit them in Houston felt...
nuts.
Yeah, because we just didn't... And whether that... Because there's always this question about... Always, the thing about Arts Council saying there's not enough ambitious stuff going on. I think we had this thing that we felt like what we were doing had this thing, but the idea of going to Houston felt ambitious, didn't it? Like, because the idea is like, well, okay, we're starting to meet these people that we knew in Briarfield already. We had these connections. Let's not just go ourselves. Let's take some people.
Take the community, and the fellowship was formed. I think 9 of us went, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That visit itself was like filled with so many transformative moments amongst the people who went with us and us as well, me in particular.
There's only one person I think that came with us that was connected to arts in any way, and she did theatre.
Yeah,
Thea.
Yeah, but I think the others were
Drive,
was school teachers, community workers,
youth workers,
community leaders,
young person that you started to work with,
and one guy who really didn't want to go, and he didn't want to go because of their politics on Muslims.
Well, it was at the time of still quite serious.
And they did get stopped at the airport, going out and on the way back.
Yeah, it was horrendous for them. They got taken into separate rooms.
Yeah, that's the 3 Asian guys. Yeah.
And then I remember that we had a really heated conversation one night, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Where it all got quite emotional, and that was because we were all going through this transformation, I think.
Knowing some of those people now, because we're still in contact with those. I think it's an element of like, it is someone else coming to work in your community. Like, Naheed was always, they've done a lot with Briarfield actually in the community. It's like, well, what are you, what are you going to do?
People
exactly, yeah. And I think that was also like this idea that what we started to talk about as being embedded practice, this idea that, okay, yeah, I'm from Pendle. In my head, it's like, well, I do know those areas well, but I don't live in Briarfield. I live in Colne, or I lived in Barrowford then. So I might have had experiences there through all my life, but it is different when you live there.
Yeah.
I live and work in a, so there was an element that it's still, I guess it's trying to work out what that, who has the right to do it or why we made the choice to Briarfield.
Briarfield. I can remember people saying to us, don't choose Briarfield.
Well, that probably was why we then decided.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably the reason why.
Because it had an unusual, as a place, it had even all that work, it was either treated separately, wasn't it? Or it was seen to be difficult, so it didn't get the same attention as Nelson.
It never got as much money from the local authority as Nelson or Colne or Barrowford, so it didn't get the nice flower baskets and buckets every year. It didn't get the great Christmas lights, and it was very much overlooked. And I think that's, why people are saying, why don't you go to Nelson? Why don't you do it in Colne? Why are you doing it in Briarfield?
Yeah.
And it was, that's one of the reasons why Briarfield.
And then everything fell into place with the library.
With the library, absolutely. And that was Paul Kelly again.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because of that timing where museums, libraries all came together, if we let them have that library space, what would that look like? But we'd already started meeting there, hadn't we?
And the space was coming up, wasn't it? A lot of things just came together.
Yep.
All at the right time.
Well, we needed somewhere to meet, didn't we? That was the thing.
And meanwhile, at the mill, all that stuff was going on with Paul, because we'd been doing all these things out in the streets, having cups of tea,
having cups of tea, wearing our matching
making cups
jackets.
of tea.
We were just drawing, weren't we? We were out drawing together.
And just meeting the community.
Having random conversations.
And then you met Paul, Paul Files.
I was out. It wasn't a day that I was out with you.
No, it was a separate day.
I'd gone separately drawing, and first I drew the produce in the baker's window, and the lady came out and told me what I was doing was illegal, and that she was going to call the police because I was drawing
cakes I remember, yeah.
in the window.
The bread cutter.
The bread cutter, yeah. That's it. I've still got the drawing. And so, anyway, enough of that one story. But so I moved on and then found myself at the gates of the mill, so that Briarfield Mill at that time, all locked up, big gates. There was a security guard there who had this massive Alsatian-looking dog that ran up to the gates, and so I was drawing on, the public side of the gate, and the security guard comes up to me and he's like, and I was thinking, it's just after the lady in the bread shop, so I was just thinking, oh God, it's going to happen again. So he comes up and he's like, what is it you're doing? I said, I'm just drawing the mill. And he went, all right, do you want to come in? I'll let you in. So then he took me into the mill and took me all around the mill. And I remember sort of saying, well, can my mates come and have a look?
My mates?
Can we play out?
And that was it, wasn't it? That was...
He carried on with that kind of nature, didn't he, all the way through, did Paul,
Yeah.
Like, whatever you want to do, just go and do it.
Yeah. And importantly, like Paul, so, he was just fabulous. I think we had such a great time with Paul. So Paul was the security guard at the mill, and at that time the mill, I think, belonged to
Barnfield, is it?
No,
it was Muslim charity.
Muslim charity. That's it. We wanted to transform it into a school,
all girls school, which didn't get planning permission.
But so Paul used to work at Briarfield Mill as an engineer, and everything was still in the mill, wasn't it? It was like still
a lot of the stuff,
full of all Smith and Nephew stuff. But he had the engineering workshop, and he was in there sort of
collecting keys mainly.
Collecting keys. But yeah, Paul was just do whatever you like. Took us up on the roof and everything.
Yeah, he was just so open-minded, wasn't he? About about art. He was a bit of an artist himself, really, wasn't he?
That's the engineering thing.
Collecting his keys and arranging them on the walls.
Yeah.
So we were sort of under the radar with Paul playing around in there, and then when we did these, I think we did a heritage weekend once, didn't we? When you were cleaning the tiles.
Oh yeah. That was because they had to do consultation about what the mill was going to be, so it was part of their consultation.
Yeah.
Did we have the timeline by Jane then?
The timeline was there, yeah.
Yeah, we'd had the first few residences had happened.
Yeah, and Helmut did something with the keys.
Yeah, with the sound.
Yeah.
I was
quite a lot in that empty mill space, didn't we? Really?
Well, that's the first thing that we did where we put something on, and I think that gave us the confidence to think, well, okay, can we start doing more of this? Because people really responded, didn't they, to being allowed back in, because it, really it was the building that was the draw for people. For me, we put some interesting stuff on, but actually, people just liked coming back into that.
They were interested in the building.
Not at first, no.
Which is fair enough.
So I suppose when In Situ first took its initial form, its shape originally, we all kind of like, I'm sure me and Kerry at least were excited at the fact that we had this freedom to do our own projects around things that we were all naturally interested in.
What I remember is freedom can be quite tricky. So I can recall that for the first year, I don't really think I did anything. And you were busy doing the Northern Soul, and we had these meetings with our kind of board of advisors, and you'd report on where the Northern Soul was going, and I was still kind of drinking tea and out drawing and chatting to people, and I wasn't really delivering, if you like, any sort of art. And on reflection, I think that was absolutely right, because it was through that I met Paul, and that organic thing happened. But early doors, my interest was in brownfields and brownfield sites, so I was starting to explore them, but it didn't feel right, didn't sit completely right. And for me, it was when that opening of the mill began that things really started to get exciting.
Well, things shifted slightly, didn't it? This focus on the library, which we were using regularly.
Oh yeah, the library work, the books
suddenly
with
shifted to this new. Well, it's like a field site itself, isn't it? The mill.
It was a derelict building.
And suddenly, we were all interested in what that had to offer.
But it was also not just what it had to offer in terms of what it presented to us, which was like giant playground with just so many opportunities. But it was also, we could see things that were happening through the process, the design process of how they wanted to regenerate the place, that wasn't in keeping with the communities and the people that were, well, that made up Briarfield. People were interested in the building, and what we were doing was unlocking the building and making sure that the people of Briarfield still had access rights, because people that were there, almost everybody worked in the mill. But I can also remember that we did a lot of cleaning and shifting in that building, that anything we wanted to do, we had to get in and clean it first. So there's a lot of physical kind of...
Inside and out.
Inside and out, yeah.
Hardcore. The way in which we then just started using that space and very little money as well. We didn't have anything at all.
We were always on a shoestring.
And we just got on with those things really, which were about, you know, letting people back in that space. I think that helped to kind of put us on the map a little bit in terms of the area, wasn't it? In terms of people getting to know us and meet us.
So we started to run the mini micro residences, which we had to apply to the Arts Council money to be able to deliver them. And that enabled us to invite artists to come and respond to place, to Briarfield, place and community. I think we had 3 things to respond to. Is it people, place and environment?
Yeah.
Which I guess is like our 3 interests. And then those people picked up on certain things in their micro residences that we either did or couldn't take forward. So one of them was Jenny, when she was going around with her library books, and she came across the demolition sign for the signal box and brought it to our attention, and then that set off a whole kind of way of working on the signal box, which was very long and drawn out and still in process now.
It's still carrying on.
Yeah, so it's like people meeting people, then introducing them to us, and our, you know, connections to people in Briarfield grew, and likewise with Paul Files at the mill, and then we had to sort of then liaise with the local authority, and then Barnfield, and
one thing leads to another.
One thing led to many other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you know, because I remember one of our early visions, or mine anyway, it wasn't just, a lot of it was selfish and self-motivated, like me wanting to be an artist in control of my own destiny. But the other one was that feeling that art should be accessible to everybody. You know, great art should be accessible to everybody. You shouldn't have to live in a city or be of a certain class or privilege to be able to access art. And what was apparent about here in some of your kind of rhetoric as well, William, was like living in the far east of Lancashire, the fact that there isn't great connectivity to Manchester unless you've got a car. So it's not the easiest place to get to. So things like Manchester International Festival or the Liverpool Biennial, it doesn't exist for people living in this part of Lancashire. It's too far away. And again, that mill and that vision that people should be able to access great art wherever they are, with having the mill gave us a real means to be able to do that. And the mill gave us the opportunity to work with big organisations like Liverpool Biennial, who had to, as part of their funding, show that they were reaching out to communities, and we happened to tick a lot of their boxes. So we were able to work with them to get some of the brilliant international artists' work over to Briarfield. And I'm thinking of Christoph, and how that happened. And again, that's a challenging piece of work.
But I do think we were trying to wrestle with this idea of constantly being told that, you know, the place is not ambitious and you can't see stuff. So it's like, and almost like that, those linking to those kind of existing institutions, the idea of international still felt like it brought quality. I think it's still a challenge. I think it's how you reconcile what we see as being ambitious or of quality, and there's a natural inkling that it has to be linked to that. But I feel really proud that we found a way that those pieces that we hosted were relevant, and we said, look, normally we'd have the artist spend some time. Can Christoph come over?
Christoph came,
and he came for a week, you know, and then just that natural. Again, I think timing has always been really key for us. Is like, you know, Pendle welcomed those first Syrian families to the area the same week that Christoph was here, and that work was installed, and so we had that connection to some of those families coming over, and that conversation being local and as well as global, you know, which I think just sort of fell into place, didn't it? You know.
But it was also fascinating having Christoph here, because I first saw that work in Venice.
Yeah.
About 4 years earlier, at the Venice Biennale, and he had one of the pavilions. And then it was in the Liverpool Biennial, and then it was in Briarfield. And he said to us, "This is the best place I've shown this work. The best venue."
Yeah, easy.
I think it's hard to understand that, like back then, the conversation about this type of practice was all happening at the same time, because we never really described it as social practice. I only learnt about those words through talking to you two about it. I never understood it in that context, but that was the conversation going on, and some of these people were the ones that were being seen, including us, to be trying to work like this at that time in a place like Briarfield or whatever, you know.
I mean, that term, socially engaged, was coined in 2011.
So in some respects, we were starting that just at that time, that was coming out then.
We started before, and Rick Lowe obviously was like 10 years before that. But so that term about socially engaged, so that's why I think it was quite difficult for us to explain what we were doing or try to kind of communicate it, because there wasn't a language around it.
But I think for me, some of the language that I connected to, you know, words like dialogical practice, or the idea of the conversation and just finding space for conversations to happen. And I think that's what I latched onto in terms of a thing, that's what we were doing in these different spaces with work, or just being out and about the way you were doing it. Or, you know, for me, starting that work with Talkie and creating these pop-up conversations, you know, and bringing that idea where you can bring people together in a more equal footing for a conversation, whether that's young people, counsellors, health workers, whatever, you know. But that's, so even though, what you're saying, Kerry, is you felt like you didn't do a lot of art at that time, but actually that's what you were doing loads of.
It was pure dialogical.
Pure dialogical. It was that, but also that the understanding of what collaboration means as well, and that's always kind of been something we've talked about or wrestled with or struggled with, whether we're either working independently or together. But, you know, you did do a lot of work with the artists that spent time here, you know what I mean? Whereas, you know, you were getting on with that, and I might have been doing a bit of that, but doing the stuff with young people, you know. So there were just elements of all these things we were trying to play around with or work out, you know.
The ethics came about because I was very aware that very few arts organisations had a code of ethics, and I thought that was curious. And we have, you know, it's that idea of writing a code of ethics, not just about how we are with social ethics and human rights, etc., but also environmental ethics.
And I think that is one of the game changers for In Situ, I think, what made it what it is today. For me, anyway, as an artist, as something that I've got from being part of it, I would say that's probably changed my practice more than anything. Yeah. For me, anyway, as an artist developing, as somebody who's just enjoyed making things forever, and then suddenly starting to actually have to look at it critically and consider it through an ethical lens, which is something that I probably just assumed I always had done. It's there for everything. Even now, it's still kind of the bottom line. Is it ethical? Is what you're doing ethical? I think it was really important for me, at least, to put it down on paper, because while we all have this tacit understanding of what ethics might be, actually to write them down and put them down in a way that's kind of transferable, you know, to other people.
If we talked a bit about then what that impact is on where we're working, is that we were openly having those conversations with everybody, weren't we? It's another way of having these conversations with people locally that might not be having those conversations, or if they are, it just brings another dimension to it.
We had those conversations about why is this art? In fact, some of the stuff what happened right back in Texas, some of that were, why is this art? You know, that was some of the questions that were coming up in that meeting in Texas. Why is this art, this project with this community? Where's the art?
The shot was great. I mean, I'm so pleased it happened, and I'm also really pleased that I wasn't involved in it.
Well, I think it was a real success story, that shop. With some spaces, the little shop and the cafe, and it was great.
Yeah.
The kind of people that would engage with it, you then going back to really seeing what the needs of some of the community were, and it's like, which was beyond
It was beyond
just the projects and our knowledge and
beyond our skills, beyond everything. I mean, because it was a pay as you feel, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we were getting food from, Jill was working with us, was volunteering, she wasn't paid, was going often to Lidl and Morrison's every day and bringing all the bread, and then you get people coming because they didn't have enough food, and then all of a sudden what you're experiencing and hearing is a whole other set of stories that you just don't know where to go with them. It's challenging. It's
with that amount of visibility and presence brought the realities of a place like Nelson, which I guess still continues today. And so it's then what is it that this work is doing, and where
it's like that kind of fine line. It's like, do we carry on as this arts kind of shop stroke cafe stroke studio spaces, or do we go full on into kind of community work and support those communities that are coming because they need the food, and it becomes a really tricky thing, for your conscience. It's like, what do you do? But yeah, I think it became hard, didn't it? I think
it was a shame when it did have to finally come to an end. But then again, even when it came to an end, it went out in a kind of blaze of glory, I thought, with the way it rallied people together, and people stood outside protesting and stuff.
Because we got locked out, didn't we? We got repossessed.
Yeah.
With no fault of our own. Was it Ellie or was it Hannah saying, I can't get into the shop?
Ellie phoned me up saying, can't get in, the locks have changed. I'm like, what? I have to say I still found it quite a difficult time to think about, because that was the most horrendous experience.
Yeah.
I've had to go through, really, what we had to do, but it did do what you said. People had grown such an attachment to it.
Yeah, they came out and they all supported it, didn't they?
To go. We nearly broke in, didn't we, with a locksmith, but then he wouldn't go through with it. I mean, because of this pressure to somehow, how do we get our stuff back?
There was an openness which created spaces for people to grow into, rather than us just saying, this is in situ, you're going to do this, we're going to do this and that.
I think
there was these other spaces which were allowed to kind of...
I think there was a lot of risk taking as well. I think we took a lot of risks, and also realising that not everybody takes risks, so we were taking risks that others wouldn't take, which then enabled stuff to happen because the risk was on us, but we were still taking it. And you've got to keep moving forward and pushing and challenging and pushing those boundaries to keep, just to keep moving forward and challenging stuff and taking those jumps and those risks and stuff. I think art has to be part of something to bring about any change. I think art is about me, the egotistical, what I want to do, where I want to be, how I see the world and how I interact with others and what others tell me. So it always comes back to me, which is super selfish, but that, I think, is what artists do. We respond to the world that we're in, and we interpret it in different ways, and we bring new things into the world through our practice. As a community worker, I would be then serving a community to help put food on. I don't see myself as somebody that helps others. I see myself as somebody that is in the mix with others, doing what I do, which will be perceived in certain ways and might change people's perceptions about the world that they live in. And that's where it comes to being collective. That's like, if you're in a place and there's a few people seeing similar things but through different lenses, then together you might be able to do something that changes a situation. I mean, look where we are. We're in the Clarion, and that's all that the Independent Labour Party and socialism and all of that was about. It was never about an individual. It was always about workers of the world unite. Mm-hmm. And so for me, so art is just another form of working, but for change to happen, we need to come together
in a particular way.
Yeah. But it's still selfish. It's, for me, it's.
Well, I think you're right. I think artists are, aren't they? Because they're filtering it through themselves, aren't they, in a way, and they're responding through themselves. And I think social art, particularly in situ maybe, is about making visible that symbiotic relationship, between all the stuff, between the environment, the people and the place. I think in situ does that. it makes visible the relationships that are already there, really, but people just aren't talking about them. And what they do through the art that In Situ makes, people talk about them, and it becomes consciousness then, doesn't it? It becomes a conversation or an action.
As In Situ progressed, I feel I became less of an artist because there was more admin to do and fundraising to do and NPOs to write, and it became just horrible. Then coming out of the other side of it, so leaving in 2018 and then transitioning back into being an artist, it has made me think about the art that I do and what is it I do. And actually now, I wrote something recently about it, and it's actually all about, I don't even know if it's art anymore, it's about action and activity.
I think all along, from the very beginning, I've always said that I'm not an artist. I have trained as an artist, but I don't work as an artist because I got sucked into community development. And it's interesting, Kerry, you saying the difference between, the idea that the artist, in your words, is selfish. I think I have definitely been brought up with the idea of what I do is a service, I guess. I don't see it as... So I constantly want to be, or put myself in a position to help facilitate this, and I just enjoy working with artists because believe that artists can see the world in the way that they do as individuals, that can unlock conversation, it can challenge, it can give us a new perspective. And I guess I've found myself in positions where I've wanted to help facilitate that. But from a community development point of view, I believe that the power of any of that only works through solid, genuine relationships with people, and that takes time that's beyond the project. It takes time beyond doing the art bit, because even more so here, because I feel like I live here and I'm from here, I can do that much more in a way that I've ever been able to do in the past. But I do feel like what I would call that as my practice has shifted so much with In Situ because of the interesting way that the only way that In Situ can exist is because there's pieces of a puzzle, and I'm one piece of that puzzle, you're another, any artist is another, social geographer is a piece of that puzzle, because I believe in that the artist is not the one thing, artist is not the saviour, which still exists a little bit in some places. It's not, we are all contributing to that, and that's the bit that I find has been really exciting, and that I can have a confidence in the piece of puzzle that I put in that. And I do think there has been impact of what we've done in 10 years, and I can see that on an individual level that's happened. I can see that with maybe how the arts ecology has changed in a small way that didn't exist 10 years ago. But also, and not necessarily to end on a bad note, we are in a worse position in these communities now than we were 10 years ago, and that's stuff that's beyond our control. So we've always been bad at giving false promises, I think, through the arts, which the system creates that through funding bids, and you say you're going to do this, you're going to do that. You might have that aspiration, but the reality is it's too big. Mm-hmm. It's too big, and all we can do, and I think I feel the same as you, is that I think my practice has shifted into understanding actually just what is my role as action or activism, and that's also been inspired by understanding the history of this area, and even finding out about the Clarion through one of our projects that I didn't know existed. I was talking the other day that I've got this one bloke that keeps turning up to Tokyo, just accuses me of being a socialist and a communist. Great. What I'm doing, I'm like,
yeah.
Well, I'm thinking, I know, but I'm thinking, I don't know if I know enough about that to say whether I am or not. But I've said, the thing is, the things that they talk about are the bits that I believe in, and I feel that we are collectively trying to address the challenges, and not everybody wants to do that because of whatever thing that's driving them. But I still believe that art and creativity are one really important part of that puzzle that would be missing if we didn't do that. If we were just scientists, if we were just community workers. So it is important that exists as one piece of that puzzle.
I agree.